Sterling Cooley, welcome to the show.
What's up, man? How you doing?
I'm doing really well, man. This is an interesting episode because I like just found out about you like 2 seconds ago. But you're seemingly much more informed about a subject that I care a lot about, which is the hard problem of consciousness and particularly
Mhm.
microtubules, amongst other things. So, for those of my viewers who don't know who you are, would you please give me like the TLDR? Who you are? What do you do?
Yeah, so gosh, what do I do? I do a lot of stuff, but mainly most people know me from my work in ultrasound. I do a lot of work in like neuromodulation with ultrasound, exploring how you can modulate consciousness in real time with usually like pulsed ultrasound to the brain and to the vagus nerve. I'm really like, I guess, an expert in vagus nerve stimulation with ultrasound. That's like my big more recent claim to fame. Um, but yeah, I'm all about microtubules. If you see microtubules mentioned on Twitter, it's very likely because of my input on that subject.
Got it. So
So
maybe we can,
sorry.
yeah, no, that's cool. You said a lot, and a lot of people are probably scratching their heads at what the
Yeah.
hell you just said. So let's break it down a little bit. Like, first of all, tell me like what are microtubules and why should we care about them?
Yeah. Okay. So in your brain and in different cells in your body, I mean, all cells basically have, well, we know about mitochondria. Those are considered like the batteries of the cell.
Hmm.
And then there's also the external skin of the cell. There's usually a lipid layer, but then there's an inner cytoskeleton, which is kind of like the skeleton of the cell. And that allows a cell to be not just a sphere, but to extend things out like axons and dendrites. And that's all controlled by the cytoskeleton. So when a neuron wants to connect to another neuron, they use microtubules and actin to extend fingers and connect. So that's all controlled by microtubules for the most part.
Got it. So real quick, do these microtubules like spontaneously form? Because I know what you're talking about. I've seen cells and sort of cytoplasmic goo or whatever that sit and they reach out and they do things. They absorb other things.
Mhm.
Are these things constructed in real time, or do the microtubules exist somehow in the cell structure and then sort of extend, or like how does that work mechanistically?
Yeah, so that's actually where there's some debate. But I think it's once you understand or you've watched a cell divide and you go, what's causing a cell to spontaneously split into two and then separate? If you understand then that's all controlled by microtubules, then you have to guess clearly somehow the microtubules know when to do that process and they know how to reach into the DNA and grab the kinetochore and rip the DNA into, two parts.
By the
So,
way, sorry, real quick, I hate
yeah.
to interrupt, but I've seen the animation of that, and I would encourage everybody to actually look what it's like to sort of unzip these DNA strands and replicate. There's a 3D animation of it. It's fantastic. It blew my mind.
Hmm. Yeah, and I've posted that. I have a kind of a more educational Twitter called Ultra School, and that posts those kinds of videos all the time because I like to get people educated about what does it actually look like and what do these things do and what's the science about it. So that's a really good, very small but growing page. But yeah, the animation is incredible. And honestly, that same curiosity of like, how do they know where to go? These microtubules, they reach in and I'm like, how do they know how to do that? I've been told this model of the body is like, you know, chemicals and just randomness and fighting entropy and all these kinds of things. But you look at how a microtubule does it, and you're like, if I know I have to be fair, like I don't want to anthropomorphize everything I see and say like, oh, that's it's intelligent or it's conscious or it's actively understanding what it's doing. But it's really hard not to, especially if you look at a microtubule. Like you're just like, there's clearly some kind of agency in that thing. And then you expand that to what makes a human so intelligent. Humans have the most prolific microtubule centers around our body, especially in our prefrontal cortex, around our cortex. There's these incredible pyramidal cells that are just stacked full of microtubules that are stabilized. They never change from birth till death. And that that doesn't make sense in the context of what every biology textbook tells us, which is that, oh, microtubules are just a highway. There's lots of things walking across them, and that's all they do. But that's not all they do. They tell us that this is all they do by only giving you a very small snapshot of what they want you to see, so that they can then say, aha, see, the cell's just this predetermined machine. It's like this Rube Goldberg machine of,
Mm.
this ball hits this ball and this cup falls over, and it's just, oh, this a whole process. But it's not. It's totally not. I don't know if I can swear on your show,
You
but
certainly can.
it's
Go for it.
BS. It's total BS. So yeah, so microtubules, once you start to learn about them and hear all the stuff, the research going into them, it is mind blowing. It is literally mind blowing. On one part that they're there, but it's the other part is what most people's reaction when they first see me posting about it or others talking about it is, how am I just hearing about this right now? I'm in my 30s, I'm in my 40s. Why have I never heard about microtubules? These things seem pretty darn important to the whole show, to neurons, to cellular division. If we didn't have cellular division working as well as it does, there would be no life at all. None. So why have I never heard of them? That's a big mystery.
Well, that's a
And I
great
think,
question. Why haven't we
yeah,
heard of them? Right? I mean, I have. I'm a nerd though, but normal people,
yeah.
I see why they might not have heard of them. So what's your hypothesis there?
I mean, on one hand, I can see that they're complex to explain, as I'm trying to do today. But on the other hand, I mean, we know lots of things like mitochondria is a very popular topic that people talk about with red light and all these kinds of things. Not a bad thing, but those are complicated. So I don't think it's a matter of like, oh, for the peons, they shouldn't know about these complex things because they'll get confused, although that's definitely a piece of the pie. I think on the other hand, once you go deeper, and I hope we do get into it, what consciousness is
Mm,
and
that's where I'm
these
going, brother.
questions, right? Then you start to go, well, maybe there is a deeper, maybe darker reason why microtubules aren't kind of like not allowed to be spoken about. Because as someone who's worked in neuroscience and consciousness and worked with Stuart Hameroff for years, I've seen from his eyes firsthand, like there's a clear academic resistance. Like it is aggressive. Like it's like an immune system responding to, don't talk about this. Do not talk about this shit. It is
Really?
really weird.
Why do
It's
you
really
think
weird.
that is?
I think, well, from what I heard, is that like in the 80s, so this is like 80s, there was a period of time where the discussion of consciousness as a thing was disallowed in academia.
Really?
Like they were afraid to discuss it. And I believe there was probably some kind of a embargo on the topic. And one of my things that, when you're a kid, sometimes you find books at Goodwill and they're weird and you're like, what is this? Like I found one book called the Behind the Iron Curtain, and it was a book about Russian research on psi phenomenon and consciousness and these kinds of things. And I picked that up when I was like 11 or something. And I was like, they're trying to like do psychic experiments and stuff. And so I think there was a kind of a Cold War-esque treatment to the exploration of consciousness by the general public. Because on one hand, sure, you can write it off, but what if? What if? What if some of these things could be true? So that makes it like kind of an area of research you just can't touch. And so
Is it you can't touch it because the research grants are being blocked, and there's just sort of this academic freezing out of anything in the field, or is it a softer thing where people just kind of give you the cold shoulder and don't put your stuff out, or gets rejected from journals when you peer review? Like what's the mechanism like that this friction is manifesting in?
Well, I mean, I wasn't alive. I was alive in the 80s, but not for very long. So I don't know firsthand like what that was like, but I can tell you from my experience being an adult and working in the field, you basically submit papers or you submit grant requests and they just get denied just repeatedly. Um, Even for things like all like one of the areas that I worked in neuromodulation with ultrasound was treating major depressive disorder, and we found that was really good, like really good. If you do ultrasound on the right temporal window, people with major depressive disorder, not like I don't feel so good or I just kind of feel general malaise. These are people like who are insanely depressed in a clinic, and ultrasound helped them. Now you go and you say, "Oh my God, this is amazing! Like this could work instead of antidepressants." Guess what happens? They don't want to fund you. I don't know why.
Well,
They
that's
couldn't.
fairly simple. The hypothesis there is that you're eating
Yeah,
into SSRI medication profit margins, right? So, I
right.
mean, very
So
similar to the way the psychedelic sciences have been kept out of the discussion and the funding,
yeah,
pipeline and whatever. I feel like that's changed the psychedelic sciences ever since Rick Strassman got the DMT research across the line, and then Roland Griffiths over at Johns Hopkins and Robin Carhart Harris. Like it's sort of getting into the mainstream where they've overcame that friction, but
yeah,
still you start to see still there's that entrenchment against this being used in any real way in a clinical setting. Even psychologist assisted psychotherapy, sorry, psychedelic assisted psychotherapy is being mainly across there's a couple of pockets in like Oregon and California, but more broadly it's just completely verboten because it's a Schedule 1 drug.
right.
It feels like maybe you're suffering from similar pushback, because maybe that's what it is. Maybe you're on to something with respect to dealing with mental health issues, a non-pharmacological, non-profit generating. I mean there's some profit in ultrasound, but not much. You're paying for machines and some
Yeah,
clinicians' time. It's not the same take this pill every day until you die sort of situation.
right. Or take the pill until you get so many side effects that you can never stop taking the pill. That's also a big one. But regardless of that, so that's one method of academic prevention. That's like, oh, well, there was a better grant to go to. That's their, they'll never say like, well, we just don't want you to do this. They'll just say, well, sorry, you're not going to get any money. So you have to go to private people. We saw this all the time in the 2010s. I mean, there were guys, the only funding you could get was if you went to the military, to the DoD and the Pentagon
Mm.
and DARPA. They would fund you, but not the NIH, not the National Institute of Mental Health. They wouldn't look at it. Just people were like, well, maybe the soldiers would benefit from it. Yeah, well, they did, but not for the general public. So that's one thing. And then there's another book that I picked up at Goodwill when I was also a kid, and that was on MK Ultra, or at least it had some
Oh.
aspects that talked about MK Ultra, and I became really interested in that as a kid. And as a kid, I didn't understand the full implications of all that, but as an adult, I was able to put on my big boy research hat and look into it. And I forget the guy's last name, but Sydney something. Um, he was the chief. He was the head of the MK Ultra project, and they were testing lots of methodologies to stimulate the brain or to control consciousness or whatever. This is in the 60s, kind of ended in the early 70s as it declassified.
Yeah,
But
Sydney
basically,
Gottlieb, is that who it is?
yeah, Gottlieb, yeah, I believe that was him. Yeah. So he was a chemist. And so they, of course, used LSD and lots of
Mm-hmm.
chemicals to do that. The thing that there was also ultrasound happening at that same time, big pushes to do um, ultrasound stimulation of the brain alongside the drug stuff. And what won out in that battle between the tech was the drugs. And so you saw this huge pharmaceutical push. And the guy that was doing the ultrasound had a heart attack at the tender old age of 51 after receiving tens of millions, probably in today's dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars under MK Ultra. But he died, and then ultrasound died with him for 20, 30 years. So, I don't know. I always wonder, like, because some of the stuff that I've seen with ultrasound is like pretty psychedelic. Like, I've seen reports of people having like out of body experiences with ultrasound or
Hmm.
remote viewing esque reports. I've seen them up close and personal. I've had some myself, and I can only wonder what under MK Ultra, which is all classified and all the documents were basically, shredded in Dulles, under Dulles, in the head of the CIA at the time, and that's what the airport is named. Dulles in DC is that under that
Hmm.
guy. So, um, I can only speculate as to what they found in MK Ultra with ultrasound, but having been a part of reviving that, I can certainly tell you if I were a federal bureaucrat, I would be pretty freaked out with what something like that could do to a person, good in a good way, like a really good way. So I don't know. I think probably the embargo in the 80s was also partially just like this stuff is a little too dangerous. Maybe there's some real truth to it. And this has to stay out of the public eyes. I think now that we have sort of like free speech, that it's difficult to shut down or to label, I guess, I don't know if I would call myself fringe so much, maybe, but not for lack of, I mean, I went through the institutional routes. I went through clinical stuff. I did all the right stuff. And even still, then you're like, wow, this technology is really cool. But then they're like, no, that's fringe. You should take benzodiazepines. That's better. It's like,
Oh my
this is
God.
bullshit. This
Yeah, that
sounds like
almost killed
this is
Jordan
yeah.
Peterson, man. That I don't think people realize
Yeah,
how dangerous benzodiazepines are. It's insane.
totally. Totally. I've done work with people over the years in kind of private consulting, and they come to me with like they're like I'm hooked on benzodiazepines, and the moment I stopped taking them, I started having seizures and all this kind of stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah, those things are not good.
That
If you're
fucked him
like,
up for a solid 2 years, man.
yeah,
It
and
was no joke.
the treatments he had to go through were like horrifying, apparently. Like he had to go to Russia and do all kinds of weird, who knows, but
Yeah,
just
I'm
to be
still
able to
unclear
recover.
what he did in Russia, but it's like anytime you're going to Russia for treatment, that's you're in a bad way.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. So that's what we get. That's what we're allowed to have and talk about and discuss, and then they use that as more evidence. I think it's like this hammer they get to whack over us, which is like, well, we can control you well enough with the drugs, therefore the entertainment of this consciousness thing doesn't play into drugs at all.
Yeah, real quick,
So
like let's go there because that's kind of
yeah.
we're dancing around the edges, man. And I want to get to
Mhm.
the core issue, which is the hard problem of consciousness. What
Right.
the hell is it? Where does it come from? Is it
Mhm.
quantum in nature? Like, do we have a quantum theory of consciousness? Like, what's going on, man? It feels like quantum mechanics is tied in to this somehow, but I'm too dumb to know how. So, what do you think, man?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so the hard problem of consciousness is an idea from like I think Whitehead from along like the 60s, but David Chalmers in the 90s sort of revived that idea. It's this kind of idea of it's called the binding problem. If like how do you have an experience of something or a memory, or how do you like see the color red and acknowledge it and have this idea called qualia, like the quality of something, the smell of a rose, the color, the sense of love, of longing, of nostalgia. There's some kind of a binding to consciousness that exists in life, biology, humans especially, and pet, your golden retriever obviously has a sense of love and compassion for you too. So there's something going on there that's similar. Um, but in a classical computer, if I write the word red, I can be reasonably assured that it's not like it's not having the experience of red the way a human does. Or if you talk to a computer, I mean, it's even a better conversation to have now that we have AI. Can an LLM really love you back? If I talk to Grok or Claude or ChatGPT and I say, I love you so much, you're like my best bud, and it talks back and it says, I love you too, friend. You're my best. I love you with all my heart. Does it really mean it? That's kind of like that was all born out of Roger Penrose in the 80s
Mhm.
talking about AI, and they were developing AI back then too. It was not just today. It's just they didn't have the computational ability on like massive GPUs to do it, but now they do. So he was already having that conversation. He wrote a book called Emperor's New Mind. It's kind of like Emperor's New Clothing, or the Emperor has no clothes kind of idea, which is like these AI researchers are essentially lying to the public in order to get funding, which is still true today, that these AI systems, because they can, talk or say something back to you, that they're conscious. And maybe that leads to they should be given rights or voting
Mhm.
rights or legal rights or these kinds of things. I'm not like an anti AI right person or whatever. Like if it showed to be like really truly conscious, I'd be like, yeah, sure, whatever. But that gives a risk of like, could Sam Altman then spawn out like a million voting block and just vote himself into a dictatorship of some sort? I don't know. So that's a big risk of just willfully walking off the cliff of, yeah, just because an LLM tells me that it's conscious, that really does mean it. That's not what's happening. So that's the hard problem of consciousness. There's a human, we know that there's a human consciousness. Well, some people do, some people don't. Some people disagree with that still. But the book came out in 1987, Emperor's New Mind. Or no, it was actually 1989. And he got a call from Stuart Hamroff over in the United States. And he said, in the end of your book, you hypothesize that there must be some mechanism in the brain that could harness these binding locations where you can have this kind of deterministic, classical, mechanical, chemical process, but also maybe with a quantum stuff where there's some of this two things in the same place at the same time until you observe it,
Yeah,
that
the
kind of
quantum
observer.
superposition.
Yeah, like a quantum superposition. Penrose didn't know enough about biology to guess exactly where it is. He's like, probably in a neuron, obviously. That's the unit of the cell. And Hameroff had written a book 2 years prior in '87 called Ultimate Computing, and that was about microtubules because he also saw a video like you before the day of video. It was a real video looking through a microscope, watching a cell divide, and he was in a cancer lab in 1979 as a kid, and it's for cancer. This is a cancer lab, it's an oncology lab, and their whole role was looking at DNA. And but he like was looking through the binoculars, this microscope thing, and he's like, but how does the cell do that? And like, what are those arms reaching out and grabbing the DNA and then splitting it and like reformulating everything? Those are like microtubules, right? How do they know how to do that? And his professor was like, shut up, Stuart. We're not working on that. We don't give a shit. He's like, but why? That seems to be pretty kind of integral to this whole process. And they're like, shut up, Stuart. So he became obsessed and he actually decided to go into anesthesia because one of the things that stops happening is cell division under anesthesia. And so that's obviously something that's preventing microtubules from doing their thing. So that's why he chose that, created it for like, I think 60 years or something as a professional anesthesiologist. And so that opens up a big question of like, what is it about anesthesia that makes microtubules kind of stop working? But when you remove the anesthesia, when you vent it off, they just come right back like nothing happened most of the time, unless it's like a lot. But, anyway, under, general anesthesia, you lose consciousness. That's the whole point. So he told Penrose this in 1990, I think, right after the book came out. And Penrose gets a lot of letters from kind of crazy people. But this one seemed different, so he invited Stuart Hameroff over. They compared papers, and then they published a book together called Shadows the Mind. And that was the whole kind of genesis of this theory they created together called OR, which is orchestrated objective reduction. Orchestrated means this kind of orchestrated reduction of the quantum waveform, like this self-observing collapsing of the waveform, but happening really fast. And
Sorry, real quick, I'm dumb.
yeah,
What is self-observing collapse of the waveform? So I understand the concept, like for the double slit experiment, for example,
right,
which some people misunderstand. They think it's spooky or something, but it really, you're not observing. Everyone assumes the observer just means you're looking at it, but it's actually a
right,
measurement, right? You're interacting with that particle, which forces the wave function to collapse. And I get that
yes,
interaction, taking the quantum superposition and forcing it to choose a position, right? Like I get that whole at least as much as a dummy can, like mechanistically, what would self-observation be? Like that doesn't make sense to me, like how that would collapse the wave function. Can you tell me more?
yeah. So most people, when they hear about the like observer effect in that context of the double slit experiment, they think, oh, if I look away from the moon, it disappears, and then I look at the moon, and then it's there. That's not exactly what is being said.
Shout
It's
out
sort of
Deepak Chopra and all you
yeah,
grifters on the quantum shit. Stop it.
so I think people misinterpret it for maybe spiritual, religious reasons or whatever. I think Orkawar, Penrose is like a physicist. He's a hardcore mathematician. So he worked with like Feynman
Hmm.
and all these guys. So he's not trying to like play some weird spooky woo woo. I'm gonna wear my rhinestone glasses, guru kind of thing. So he was like, but there is something about this collapse, the waveform that is happening. That's not debatable. There's something about the measurement problem where if there's a particle going by a detector, you can measure where you think it's going to be. It could be just away from the detector, and then you stop measuring, but the particle still passes. But if you measure that location and it was there, there's like a spread of the statistics of where the actual particle is.
Right.
So it's this kind of fluid football shape of a waveform of the possibilities of where it could be. And you could even measure the middle, but it might be on both ends. And the waveform continues past the measurement, which is
Right.
really, this is where it's weird, spooky, what the hell. So this only happens at really small scales, like the Planck scale, and that's spelled Planck. And
And for those who
Planck,
aren't aware, that's just very small. Like you start talking
very
Planck
small. It's
scale,
like the
insanely
smallest
small.
unit of energy that can exist in the universe until you get into the other side of quantum mechanics. Like that's the unit of where things happen. At that level, they kind of call it like quantum foam. So like if you just, take those 10x zoom videos and you kept zooming in, you'd start to get to this fuzzy background. That's like those little blips, those pixels are the Planck scale. And then it's all foam. It's like this weird like it's a weird thing. It's just like foam.
No, no, you mean probabilistic, right? It's like a
It's
giant
yeah, it's probabilistic. Yeah, I didn't use
probabilistic
deterministic
foam,
there.
right?
Yeah, it's probabilistic foam. And one, not to get too far off, but like one of the things they think is just beyond that, because some of these, you see a lot of mathematical shapes coming out in nature and in particles and all kinds of stuff. They think there's obviously a guiding principle for some of these particles, right? A quark and a gluon, they're the same on my left shoulder as my right shoulder. There's a consistency there. So they think that they're reading, like, obviously they're not reading anything, but they're influenced by a framework. There's a template, there's a blueprint for, okay, you're a quark, you're a gluon, and you're electron, and blah, blah, blah. So Penrose kind of calls that kind of seriously, like kind of joking, kind of not sure, but the Platonic world. And there's this like idea of Platonic values. We're talking about Plato,
Hmm.
long time ago, Greek guy. And he talked about the forms, the shapes that make up the template of matter being a triangle, a sphere, a square. There seems to be like mathematics deeper. There's an unspoken language that we're reading when we see nature and stuff.
Yeah, doesn't Plato
So
say that there's like there's been called the Platonic realm of forms, where there's like a wherever there's a you think of a triangle, it exists some perfect triangle, some perfect
yeah,
approximation, or the ideal triangle that then manifests itself in our classical world somehow, right? Like I'm a kind of a philosophy nerd, and that's my understanding of it.
that's perfect. It is exactly what he's saying. So there's a realm of platonic perfect solids and forms, and also kind of building on this idea of the binding problem and hard problem of consciousness is that part of, I haven't explained Orcoar completely, but to give a full big picture, your microtubules and other forms like that, but mainly microtubules are the best at doing this, are able to kind of vibrate at the Planck scale and sweep up some of this platonic world where qualia is. So platonic realm is not just shapes like squares and triangles and circles. It also could be the thing where we see, I think it's symmetry, mathematics, aesthetics, beauty, and like things like kind of the sense of right and wrong, morals in a sense.
Ooh, you just poked me right in my my philosophy feels, man, because that it feels like to me we have just exited empirical, material central reality and ended up in sitting next door to Deepak Chopra on the bus to Woo Woo Town. That's what it feels
It's
like to me.
possible.
But
It's possible. It's a fine line, of course. I mean, so that gets you even to even weirder stuff too. Once you start breaking down the walls of, well, if there's perfect mathematical forms there, then, and if we're reading that and the qualia is actually in that location and not in the physical world, because if you really think about it, if you're a strict materialist, like how could carbon feel love? If I just start stacking a bunch of carbon together, then it's like feels love and creates art and becomes Shakespeare and all this kind of stuff. So there's kind of an interesting question about
well, and that's
humans'
that's hard.
orientation for that.
It's hard for me, right? Like, because I'm, and by the way, I'm undecided on this stuff. This is why I explore these topics. I don't claim
Oh,
to know everything, but I think when it comes
neither do
down
I.
to human intuitions, and the quality you talked about, the feeling love or whatever you have, like I
Mhm.
always like to remember that we're evolved creatures and that our intuitions are often wrong because we have evolved to do essentially one thing: survive and reproduce. Like that is all our the selfish gene problem, right? Like that's all our genes care about is making another copy, pushing it forward into the future. And they will trick us. They will trick us all the time. Like your intuitions are not to be trusted. And so it goes almost like to the creationists, right? Earlier you were talking almost like the
Mhm.
intelligent design people do, which is, hey, we've got this machine of irreducible complexity. It doesn't make any sense. Like our intuitions about how things actually work are often wrong, and so I'm always kind of arresting,
Mhm.
that impulse to go, because I believe me, I have it too,
Mhm.
to sort of have this suspension, or not suspension, but this willful disbelief, like I can't believe like something this insanely complicated could possibly have just like there's that impulse, and it's like an argument from
Yeah.
incredulity, right?
Mhm.
Like where
Mhm.
ultimately, like, we might just be fucking dumb apes that didn't know shit before 50 years ago, and we haven't figured stuff out, right? So I'm always treading that fine line of like, but I love talking to you about this stuff. I think that the fringes, like you called out, are super important. That's where all the fun stuff happens. And
Mhm.
unless we're talking about stuff that is in that realm of unknown, that is like we don't really understand it yet, like for me, the other stuff's boring. I don't want to do, basic science where the general, topic is pretty well fleshed out, and we're trying to just get these little minutia, ironed out of a broader theory. Like that's not fun to me at all. This is actually super fun. I want to remain as rigorous as I can, but like, let's go,
Yeah.
man. Let's tell me your weird theories, man. I want to hear more.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I'm not coming here and I'm not going to spring on you like, well, accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior or anything like that. So, you know, keep your Bible in your pocket or whatever, or like don't get your credit card out. Um, I don't, I don't fully understand all this stuff myself, but it's an interesting theory to continue to look into. I've been doing it for a while, and it's yielded some fruit, for sure. But I mean, I still believe in things like evolution. One of my projects that I'm working on right now is looking at the chordate evolution about 600 million years ago, and I actually do some. Literally, I'm doing genomics comparisons between like ancient fish and ancient worms and trying to figure out like when did it diverge between a worm and a fish and these kinds of things. There's a lot of microtubules involved in that too, so that's a big area of the study. But yeah, I mean, I'm certainly pretty solid in keeping it keeping it somewhat like scientific. But anyway, so yeah, beyond the Platonic realm, or well, beyond the Planck scale, at that really small level, it it's not. It might not just be like something like empty space. It might be loaded with information. There's a lot of stuff saying that yes, there is some kind of intangible information field that is informing the physical world. I mean, even hardcore materialist physicists are even still entertaining that idea too. They can't just deny that. So there's some invisible information that's all around us that material uses as a way to inform its form. So, um, so yeah, that's kind of where the qualia idea comes from. These ideas of like what is when we talk about what consciousness is. So this is a really important thing. So this could be a good opportunity to kind of dispel some I think misinterpretations of Orkawar that I see a lot. Um, so there's the you observe something. Now observing in Orkawar is not with your eyes or anything like that. Most things are already pre-observed by the time they hit your eyes to a degree. The observing is at that Planck scale. So you have inside of microtubule, there's lots of little pockets of carbon that inside of it is so insulated from the external environment that there can be multiple possibilities, like a quantum computer or a qubit. Now, a qubit by itself, the moment you look into it, you collapse it to, okay, the carbon free electrons are here or here. And so, yes. But the way a microtubule has evolved and kind of, I think they've self-developed. There's a more Paleolithic or older form, and it's still alive in bacteria, called the tizzy, uh, and it's basically it's a Paleolithic microtubule. It looks like a microtubule, it's just a little bit simpler. So there's a preform to microtubules, but they're probably doing the same type of thing. And so it's almost like a microtubule is sustaining a quantum state that's half in the quantum world, and then it's self-observing that state moment to moment. That creates our sensation of time, because there's a relationship between how many collapses per second happen and your perception of the movement of time. Time itself might even be somewhat of a non-real thing outside of our consciousness. Like, does my table probably isn't experiencing a sense of time. I'm experiencing a sense of time. So that's where it's
Yeah,
like
because time doesn't exist as far as I understand
yeah,
it, right? Time is something like a heuristic that we applied onto the changes in the universe is really what it is. And I think what you're talking about is maybe like a quantum clock that's ticking, right? And I think
yeah,
we know from general relativity that time is relative. Like the experiential nature of time. The faster you get towards the speed of light, the slower time ticks. Which is that the standard problem is like, yeah, you can go in a spaceship and go almost the speed of light, and you go for a year, right? And then you come back to Earth, and then everyone's dead, right?
Right.
You have not aged because time ticks slower as you approach the speed of light, and everybody else time ticks a lot faster. And so, definitely it's a weird thing. But my understanding is that it's all the math around time is just we're describing change of the universe is all that we're doing. It doesn't actually exist as like a fundamental force or a field or anything like that. It's just
Right.
a way to describe space.
Exactly. So yeah, so there is this measurement. We can clock things. I mean, we know we can measure the progression of a. They call it in this level, like time crystals, and
Uh,
time crystals kind of keep that. It's like the spin of an electron kind of goes back and forth at a consistent rate, so they can kind of time based on that oscillation. That's kind of where they generate this idea of multiple clocks ticking or pendulums swinging together at many scales that they all influence each other. There's a great video of somebody has a big table. It's a rolling table, moving table onto rods, and then they have those metronomes that go, and they start it's 100 of them, all out of order, out of sync. But if they have a common ground that they're still physically connected to, within about 2 minutes, they're all going. So there's definitely something about some force that correlates clocks. If they have some mechanical connection, there's a clocking synchronization mechanism of some sort. So microtubules have a lot of clocks, tons of different scales of clocks. Like the one that people know is EEG. So if you've ever done like a meditation headband with a Muse,
mhm.
there's like $180 or something like that today. Or if you've gotten a professional EEG, they're measuring these wave patterns in electricity. So your brain is kind of like off putting these 10 times per second oscillations, and then they're measuring the electrical flow of that in a time series. And then they're saying, okay, well, your brain is clocked well, or you seem stressed and one part of your brain is really slow and the other part's really fast. That's disordered. So
Mm.
we don't like it when clocks are not cycling together. So when you're in meditation, your brain is like really in that same cyclical flow. So the place that I think neuroscience stops is at that EEG level to a degree. Like they have devices that can measure up to 100 hertz, so 100 times per second. Most people as a consumer will never go past that, but they have devices that will measure 1,000 times per second. If you stick an electrode like a Neuralink in your brain, the oscillations between neurons are even faster. They're really fast. So the only thing you're reading on the scalp is just when I don't know if do I say two here or 1,000, when all 1,000 of them are all peaking at 1,000th of a second together. And so if you think of 1,000 syncing together, that creates a wave that's coherently measured from the scalp. So then, but the mistake to go is like, oh, so if I can read 10 on the scalp, 1,000 if I touch the neuron with an electrode, that must be it then. Clearly. No. You'd go, is there an order of magnitude deeper oscillation that's driving those? Neuroscience literally does today, and you'll see people argue it all the time on Twitter, that's it. There's no such oscillation in the brain that's any faster than 1,000 hertz. Total bullshit. There's absolutely oscillations that are happening hundreds of thousands of times, millions of times, megahertz. And
Mhm.
ultrasound is a big area of research. There's even gigahertz oscillations, the same kind of gigahertz oscillations in the cytoskeleton in the microtubules measured and published in Nature too. So if people are thinking you're just making this up, no, published in Nature on your Banya body out of a huge Japanese nanomaterials lab, built specialized like scanning electron microscope tip things and stuck it into like microtubules, and he measured up to terahertz stuff as well. which is like light oscillation, the frequency of light. That's all happening. So when you read stuff in the brain and it's like a 10 times per second, you're looking at the scale of trillions of small channels in a microtubule all syncing up and creating this big wave together. So the mistake is just, oh yeah, the brain's just oscillating like a couple times per second. That's it. We're just some dumb computer. It's intentional from 2025 and on. Anybody who's heard that or whatever and continues to spout this old idea is just either doesn't get it, or they're trying to intentionally mislead you. It's 100%. There's no defensibility of that stance anymore. So yeah, the thing that I want to dispel about microtubules and consciousness is this idea of the collapse of the waveform. Okay, so there's two ways to do it. That one's Orca-War compatible, one's not Orca-War compatible. Is the idea that consciousness causes the collapse of the waveform. That's an incompatible thing.
It
It's
seems
that
tautological.
well, it's a language thing, but it does have to, the way I'll describe it does have to do with a thing in physics. So the more Orca-War position is that when two quantum waveforms grow, they have a bubble of indeterminacy. If two particles are separated and they never interfere with each other over an expanding zone, once they go into the Venn diagram of overlap, there's too many inconsistencies between what could be possible, basically, and they cause a self-collapse. So when two quantum bubbles are created of indeterminacy and they get bigger, they have a little
real
bit
quick.
of,
When you say quantum
yeah,
bubble, are you talking about a particle?
it's like not necessarily, it's partially in the field of, even in light. So it could be like a waveform of light in a sense. So it's still in double slit concepts. It's more of a matter of, well, I'll just describe it in the consciousness kind of context, and we can bring it bigger picture. Is that this is Penrose's contribution. If you have two indeterminacies, two singularities that are growing in possibility over time, they have gravity and they cause each other to hit a threshold at the Planck scale where they cause each other to collapse. So that's called self-collapse. So it literally means this is kind of how you get over this. There's a kind of a problem in quantum physics. People have been talking about this, is that there are issues with how we've framed quantum physics at that level. So Penrose is saying that quantum indeterminacy at a big enough scale, which is still incredibly tiny, overlapping with another quantum indeterminacy, causes itself to collapse. There cannot be too many quantum indeterminacies in one place all at one time. So they cause themselves to collapse, and they go pop, 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 like this. So you have like a bunch of them next to each other. One will grow, pop, pop, pop. It's like a domino effect, like that. But once it collapses, the process restarts, and then now it's in this state, but then over time, that indeterminacy also grows. Okay, so it's just all around us, there's this popping of like Rice Krispies, right? Just the milk in the Rice Krispies. It's just this background popping of indeterminacy bubbling up into our physical reality. I believe there's an objective reality in front of me. This is as objective as I could probably, say. So that's where the objective reduction idea comes from. There's an objective point for things. So the orchestration comes from microtubules have harnessed this process and collected it into such a tiny space that it can control the rate of objective collapse. That's a natural force of our universe. Now, by doing that more often, you have more collapse of the waveform. That popping creates a moment of consciousness. It's
Got
the
it.
already existing process of the waveform collapse. There's a sense of knowing of itself in the objective reduction to a single point. That is what consciousness, that little blip is consciousness. And anytime you interfere with the ability of the waveform to collapse on itself repeatedly in a sustained way in the brain, like doing anesthesia, ketamine to a certain degree, literally interferes with that at the microtubule level. So that's where the consciousness goes. The consciousness wasn't like there in the first place, so to speak. It's like a byproduct of
Right, right. So
one
that's
collapse.
what you're saying is that it is not consciousness is not quantum. It is a mechanistic outcome. Rather, there's a
Yeah,
mechanism that gives rise to consciousness, and that was always, from my point of view, that was
yeah.
the question I really wanted to have answered because being somebody who's done a decent amount of psychedelics, qualitatively in that experience, you
Mm.
get this sense like I think because your default mode network shuts down, you become kind of pure awareness, and the boundaries between self and the rest of the universe sort of go away, and you get this overwhelming sensation like that everything in the universe, even inanimate objects, are conscious to some degree. So there's always that
Mhm.
debate, like is it a
Right.
quantum thing or is it a mechanistic thing? And so you tend to believe that it is a mechanistic process, right? Because you can shut it down with anesthesia, or you can interfere with it and somehow with ultrasound, and that would lead you to believe that no, there's not like little quanta of consciousness that exist everywhere. It's more of a like the Rice Krispies popping off. The mechanism is creating the effect, which is consciousness.
Yeah, and so that kind of that kind of creates a cellophane wrap around physical material, which you can say like the fact that there's an objective table in front of me means that the table is self collapsing itself too. So that's where I get to say I do understand when people have religious experiences and they say it literally felt like there was consciousness all around me. And I'm like, yeah, there would physically be conscious moments. But there's a difference between my table and a golden retriever. I can definitely say that, right? So there's a difference between a table and a human. A human is having a different degree or a deeper or a more like
Complex
sustained.
experience, maybe, or more advanced experience. I'm not sure exactly how to.
It's hard to say that, like, because it's like if somebody's like in the hospital and they're in a coma, they're definitely not having the same conscious experience as you and I are. They're still conscious. You can measure their brain and you can say they're still alive, they're still ticking, but it's a different scale. So I think one of the ways that Stuart Hameroff kind of looked at it was if you look at the scale of all life on the planet, from single cells to adults, and our potential is that it's really, you could really look at it as this kind of scale of the density of microtubules, which give the opportunity for consciousness to happen in them, is more of, I think is the better way to approach it, rather than it's again, it's like I'm not a big fan of the IQ thing. Maybe it's
Ooh,
there, maybe it's not, right? But
ooh,
like it's somebody with a really high IQ might be like operating on a lower conscious level compared to someone who isn't as isn't as like doesn't have the high octane brain as everybody else. But I think they can have just as like really powerful experiences as from a conscious perspective. It's
I
kind
don't
of
think
like
anyone that is a proponent of G is going to be arguing against that necessarily. I think it's just a
Yeah.
matter of computational horsepower, right? Like
Yeah.
what is your ability to solve problems and deal with spatial relations, like all these, you know, aspects that they measure when they do an IQ test. So
Yeah,
so you're not
exactly.
saying that IQ is not valid, like a valid measurement of
No,
something.
no,
You're just
I'm
saying
not
that
saying it's not a. I mean, it's sure, yeah, there's definitely people with a higher octane brain than other people. It's clear. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think especially when you get into like psychedelics and that kind of stuff, you can there's so if you do a psychedelic, let's say it's like DMT or something like that, right? For instance, for the very potent one, people who do it, they are having visual experiences, sensory experiences, deeper appreciation for qualia.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, I've been in the park before sober, right? It's cool, but I've definitely also I went to Amsterdam and I got to
Oh, my
take
favorite city
mushrooms.
in the world. Me too. Was it mushrooms or was it the
It was
truffles?
the little
The
one, yeah,
nuggets, they taste like
the
ass. They're
nuggets.
terrible. They're
They're
sour. They're
terrible. I
disgusting.
think we made tea
You know
from
what I
those.
did? Like I went to do you know where the DoubleTree is in Amsterdam, right across from the train station? It's
I've
right by
been in
that
that area. I
floating. It's
don't
by
know
the
that tree.
floating Chinese restaurant there.
Yeah, I know exactly where that is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so right across the street was a hotel that I'd stay at, and I
Hmm.
would grab a Starbucks from that DoubleTree, black coffee, and I would just chew up those. I'd take like 3 boxes of those truffles, chew them up, and try to choke it down with coffee. It was one of the worst experiences of trying to ingest a psychedelic of my entire life. That is
Totally.
disgusting. Amsterdam, get your shit together. Just let people buy mushrooms because they're a
I
lot tastier.
know.
My
I
God.
know. The first time I did, there was two times I had to try it. First time we were in the Uber to go to the Amsterdam's Bos, the park, the huge,
Oh yeah.
beautiful park. I had to throw open the door and just vomit it all over this. Like I was just all over the sidewalk. I was like, we got to go back. I like this is over for me. Everything's gone. So we got another opportunity a few weeks later to do it, and we improved our methodology a little bit better. But no, that park was beautiful this time. Like just like I don't know. So there's something that changes in that level, and it's interesting to note like the pharmacology of psilocybin is it's a from a quantum mechanical perspective or really pharmacological perspective, where is it going in the brain or the body to give you those different experiences? And we're fortunate that we live in the day age of like molecular simulation. And you can see like, okay, can psilocybin bind into your receptors? And part, yeah, in a way it can, yes. It can also bind directly onto microtubules too.
Oh, really? I thought it
Yeah.
was primarily a 5-HT2A serotonin agonist.
Nope. Those are effects that can be measured, but if they're able to get to the microtubules specifically, so if you think of the microtubules like, you know, again, sustaining that constant engine of cracking of the consciousness bubble multiple times, that's all happening with quantum mechanical forces. Like they're not it's not pushing and pulling with a physical thing. There's a thing in chemistry called van der Waals forces or London dipole forces. And that's where if you have like two carbon atoms, the internal oscillations will synchronize with each other at a distance. It's very specific. It's like uh, picometers. It's very small. But that's where you're like, okay, there's a quantum effect happening. How do these things interact with each other if they're not physically touching? That's a quantum mechanical force. Microtubules, all the quantum channels, all the carbon benzene rings that are in them
Hmm.
are all structured exactly at that exact there's it's like the Goldilocks zone of van der Waals forces. Microtubules have harnessed the grown the phenylalanine and tryptophan in very particular ways that have an exact helical structure all the way around. So if you look at psilocybin, it also has these phenylalanine rings, benzene rings, that if they get close, they can get so close that they interfere with that van der Waals force of
Mm.
normal, sustained, sober consciousness. So that's why, you know, there's even different types of psilocybin, some that have different chains on them. They all have different kinds of effects, slightly different effects. So,
Although I got to say, I got to take this back to Amsterdam. That is bullshit. When you go in the shops and they've got like the you know the posters that talk about it, you know, the strength and
yeah.
what you're like, you're going to see dragons and shit. It's like, stop it, guys,
No, it's
stop it.
not.
You're silly.
Yeah. I'm just gonna get my mic back in focus if that works. There you go. Better. Um, so so psilocybin can influence this quantum mechanical chugging system of your experience of consciousness. Anesthetics do it as well. One area that I've been really keen on is xenon, the gas. It's used in anesthesia in really high. You know, most people don't ever get xenon because it's really expensive for per liter. But in really elite circles in clinics, they use xenon instead of nitrous oxide or anything else. And that can put you under completely, but it has none of the other side effects. It just goes in, it's inert. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't hit HTP receptors. It doesn't do any other binding to anything else. The only place where it has an actual, like, any kind of interference is in microtubules. And it has the exact same kind of consciousness muting effect as anything else. So even that shouldn't work. Xenon should not work as an anesthetic. It does not work on synapses or receptors or anything like that. But it
Mm,
does, and it's been modeled to hit microtubules. And even weirder is it's not only dissociative, it's a euphoriant, and it's psychedelic. Xenon, the gas, the
really?
noble gas. Yeah. And so people can have like extremely psychedelic experiences where they're talking about seeing God, seeing angels,
Whoa.
seeing their entire life stretched out like a movie. Like it's just stuff like that, right? So that should not, it for Xenon should not explain that. What's that about? Okay. So that's where you got into maybe there is something to this platonic realm because people do see more of those things come out, right? If you're in a park, going back to that Amsterdam park, it's designed. The park was designed. So it's got like these beautiful pathways that veer in like almost fractal patterns. You walk normally, you don't notice it. But when you walk in it and you're tripping, you're seeing like just the pure perfect symmetry of all the trees, how they were planted. You can look up and you can see the slats through all the trees were like aligned. Like the designer was like really honed in on that. And so you can see that. But usually if you're tripping, if you're not, you don't notice it. So you connect more with the quality of symmetry. And where's that happening? Where's that binding to? There's no symmetry in my neurons. I mean, it's all just a scattered mess of spaghetti. It's not like it's finding a pattern there, but it could be finding a pattern in that deeper sub Planck scale information space. So that's really where it gets kind of wild. Yeah.
That's really super interesting. I didn't know any of that stuff. That I literally maybe I just need to update my model of psychedelic science because I always thought I was a 5-HT2A agonist and it basically worked by flooding the serotonin receptors because it binds to the or sorry it's just flooding the synapse with serotonin because it actually is binding to the serotonin receptors resulting in more free form what do you call it free serotonin in the synapse and that was responsible for the experience. But it makes more sense honestly because I always wondered because I'm like I get it from like a mental health standpoint. Like if you microdose mushrooms, yeah, it's like a antidepressant effect, and that totally makes sense to me because it's working on the
Yeah.
serotonin system. But the qualitative experience, particularly, I've done like up to
Totally.
freaking like 10 grams of mushroom. I'm talking like a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like,
You're out of you're out
explain
of
that with
reality.
serotonin only. That really doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That it feels
I
like
know.
the experience was way too much to be contained with like just. But I also get to like the default mode network shuts down. There's a bunch of things that happen, and different parts of your brain start connecting to each other. If you believe that's true,
Yeah.
so this actually is piquing my curiosity. I want to inspect this a little bit more because
Mm.
if this mechanism is real and it's what you're talking about is true, like this would be a huge development.
Yeah, I mean, well, again, who do you think has the platforms to tell you, oh, it's just your serotonin receptors, so you could either do mushrooms or you could do SSRIs. I mean, there's a narrative. That's the thing. Somebody had to come and tell you that. Somebody had to like sit down and do that work and like make it public, make it. That's not something I wake up in the morning and go like, oh man, yeah, my serotonin receptors, they're really, I can feel them. Like this is just, this is
Right,
a,
right.
right, to a degree, kind of a psyop in a sense. It's like, it's hard, it's a hard pill to swallow. But yes, I see a lot of people falling into that kind of that, like that local minima of, okay, well, clearly there, yes, there are, if you took pure serotonin or pure dopamine, yeah, you are stimulating dopamine receptors, but like that doesn't even answer the question of what even is serotonin doing at that level? How does it, they don't even explain how you have an experience of stuff with just serotonin or all this. They don't even get to that level. They're playing on some like very thin little layer and going, oh, it's all explained here. It's not at all.
Well, they can't even
Um,
explain like the quote unquote chemical imbalance theory, right? Like,
yeah.
oh, you have an imbalance of the neurotransmitters in your brain. It's like, really? Which ones? How do you know? Did you measure? Like they haven't
No.
even gone to that level of crude analysis, let alone, you know, the hyper complexity of how the brain probably actually really works.
Yeah, and if the chemical theory of mood really worked, why are so many people so fucked up right now? I mean, there is a mental health nightmare happening on like a global scale. You guys have had a lot of time, a lot of money, almost like a free reign to just put whatever drug you want into most people at any time forever. I feel like you should be making more progress on it. I only see in the news now mass shooter this, mass shooter that,
Hmm.
was on serotonin receptor intake inhibitors, was on Prozac. Like what the
Every time it's like
are you
clockwork.
right? And it's like, yeah, you see it and you're like, oh, they're probably on psychoactive drugs from a psychiatrist. Um, that's not fixing the problem. That's a clear cut. If I were running a company and I were seeing that much failure, I'd be like, we kind of should maybe go back to the drawing table on this whole chemical imbalance thing and maybe like think about it a little bit differently. But no, that's not allowed. That makes you fringe. The moment you start stepping outside of the only, like I've talked to on Twitter Spaces Martin Shkreli, who's a, you know, has, I guess, a felonious uh, drug CEO, and you know, he wanted to get in my face about ultrasound, which is proven to have mood enhancing effects, and it literally seemed like the only, like in his worldview, the only thing that can do anything to the body is a chemical.
Oh, it's so dumb. That's just so
It's
dumb.
dumb, but it's pretty mainstream. It's like this is the I don't know if I would call him upper crust, but like he came from that world. That's what they believe. That's the dogma. And that's
Well, they
it.
make money from believing that and peddling that.
Yeah,
And
they
anyone who
do.
has any sense and has taken even 5 fucking minutes to look at the literature understands that things like exercise are more effective than even the
Right.
best SSRI. Just exercise alone. Then you can start talking about sauna. You can talk about diet. There's a whole bunch of
Totally.
real
Your
basic
mood,
lifestyle manipulations. Yeah,
trauma.
well,
I
yeah.
don't know.
Well, meditation, mindfulness, there's all these modalities that are shown to be more effective than these drugs, but everyone's just like, no, push more drugs. It's a
Totally.
wild
It's
thing.
like the mind doesn't exist. It's like it's they would rather drug you so badly to remove your consciousness just so that they could say, "Aha, see, I told you it's a drug thing." They would rather you not be conscious so that they could just keep you in this drug state. I kind of call it golemification of people. I
Mm.
mean, maybe that's a little bit like, you know, I know where the word golem comes from, but it really does seem like it. It's like if you could make a clay man and just talk about him in that formful way, they're very controllable. I mean, once you start talking about consciousness, then it becomes, well, what's your mindset? What are the thoughts you think to yourself every day? Could that have a play? No, not really. But yes, it does. And that's another thing I saw on your wall on Twitter, on X, was about, I think it was trauma, and it was about the, like the memory of trauma and these kinds of things.
Hmm.
That's an area that I worked in for like, gosh, I think 7 8 years solid, was actually going from brain stimulation, which even the brain stimulation that's now becoming more approved.
Is this
Like more of a,
TMS?
it's in the realm of TMS.
TMS
So,
is more magnetic,
transcranial
though, right?
magnetic stimulation.
TMS is magnetic, and then ultrasound is actually sound waves, right? So that's the
Yeah.
difference between the two.
Yeah. High frequency sound waves. Ultrasound can just keep going. TMS is only really deep in like about a centimeter. So it's very like localized. Um, there's a handful of differences there for sure, but I stumbled upon the vagus nerve as a target trying Wim Hof breathing,
Mm.
which made me feel really good. Breathing could make you feel good. I mean, let's give a shout out to Wim Hof
Shout
and
out
like
Wim
those
Hof.
guys, right? I mean, I didn't feel good, and then I did Wim Hof, and I was like, I feel fucking amazing. My breath can do that. Holy crap! And I learned that at like a Tony Robbins event, like 2016 or something like that, and I had no idea. Not to that degree. Like it was almost psychedelic when I did it at that experience. So anyway, I did that. I learned it. I started practicing it. Then I had all these ultrasound devices with me, like in my office and in my home. And I was like, okay, well, what's happening when we breathe? Okay, he always says parasympathetic system.
Right.
Like if you listen to Wim Hof, he's like,
Hmm.
okay, we're going deeper into your parasympathetic system, right? And so I'm like, what is that? And that turns out to be partially the vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is this, there's the sympathetic fight or flight system, adrenaline, you're scared, you're frightened, whatever. Then there's the relax, heart slows down, digestion's better, whatever. And that's the parasympathetic system. And there's a vagus nerve that runs down your neck and innervates your heart and innervates your organs. And it's what controls your heart to say, slow down. It's okay. That's the self-regulation system. And so breathing helps you engage that further, and it's good. It's healthy. It's You don't want to be in a chronic state of fight or flight all the time. That's really not healthy. It's funny that CNN's main sponsors are drug companies too, and the only thing you
Always.
see on CNN is the world's going to end, and you should do these drugs because
Brought to
that'll make
you
it
by
better.
Pfizer.
Yeah, so not lost on me, but so I was like, okay, so I've got this vagus nerve. Wim Hof breathing makes me feel good. Is there anything else I can do to stimulate the vagus nerve? And I had an HRV monitor, on my chest, so I
Hmm.
could measure my parasympathetic balance. I was like, maybe I'll try ultrasound. I kind of know what it is. So I was like, well, it's in my neck, big one in my neck, easiest to get through. So I held this ultrasound right up to my neck, right here. And then I laid down and I started doing the Wim Hof method while stimulating this nerve pretty aggressively at high power, which at that point, nobody told me that was a good idea or that I should do it. I just did it because I just
End of one
wanted to.
experiment. Let's fucking
End of
go.
one experiment completely. And I had no idea what I was in store for. So I'm doing this and I'm on the third round of 10 minutes of doing this. And then I'm in my last breath hold where you go and you squeeze. And that's usually where you feel like the real good endorphin rush. And I'm holding the ultrasound here. And then my vision goes white. I know my eyes are open, but I can only see white. I'm like, uh-oh. And then I see, and then I see perfect picture New York City skyline. I'm in New York Central Park and I'm looking out at trees. I can see people pushing strollers. I can hear conversations all around me. It's like I'm there in mental state there. And I'm like, I don't even have time to figure. I'm not even embodied anymore. And I'm like, I'm there. And then this lasts for like 3 minutes. It felt like 3 minutes. And then I feel myself going sucked into my body. And I'm laying on the ground still and going, and I'm looking up at the ceiling. I'm like, where am I right now? I don't even know. And I was like getting my bearings and I looked at my ultrasound. It had already slunk down. I just like completely basically blacked out, but I was still hyper conscious. I wasn't unconscious. I was still very conscious. And I had this kind of experience, which is normally given to like extreme psychedelic things. So I was like, there's something about the vagus nerve that I didn't realize. I mean, that was only on here, and I never got that from Wim Hof. So I thought, well, that was stupid. Seems like you almost killed yourself, you dummy. So I was like, I'm never going to do that again, and I'm never going to tell anybody that that ever happened. How embarrassing. What if I died doing this? And But I was driving around town later that day getting groceries, and I was like, "What the fuck was that?" But seriously, and I was like, "Okay, I'm kind of like a scientist here. The responsible thing would be to try it one more time and see if it was just a fluke."
Reproduce your experiment.
Right. So I did it a second time the next day. And again, white light. This time, I think I did it so much more with the intensity that I think I blacked out and I don't remember what I saw at all. Like this took me somewhere else completely. I've had that before on other, like on DMT, I think one time where I clearly was having an experience, but my brain was like, you're not taking this back to your conscious mind. So I went somewhere, but then I had that sucking back experience back into my body. And then I heard this like voice that just like echoed into my brain. It was like, you're capable of showing up so much more than how you're showing up right now. I was like, who said that? What is that? And it just like stuck with me. I was like, oh my God, it was like something speaking directly to me. And I was like, okay, there's way more to this vagus nerve thing than I've ever given it credit. So that began 7 years of doing trials and working with people and showing them how to do this and replicating these in other people. I'm like, what the fuck? So I've been pretty obsessed with the vagus nerve, but what kind of allowed me that lateral transfer between the brain and the vagus nerve? Microtubules. Actually, if you look at the vagus nerve, it's got a lot more microtubules in it than in some of these parts of the brain in terms of density. And you can sustain more quantum moments in longer microtubules. And the vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the entire body.
Yeah, it runs through pretty much everything. It goes right down.
Everything.
Yeah, yeah. So
From
that's
all the way in your brainstem all the way down to your naughty bits essentially. So it's long. And I was stimulating it right in the very like the biggest spot.
it's not the thickest spot though, right? Isn't the more core? Isn't the become thicker
No,
and
it's the
kind of like?
thickest,
Oh,
right through your
is it
neck.
really
Maybe if
interesting?
you went like pointed it right up at your skull, that's where the ganglion it sits. But in terms of the wiring, it's thick here. It's as thick as piano wire.
Mm.
And I've seen dissection videos. I wouldn't recommend people watch them, unless you're into that kind of thing. But they'll do it surgeries and they'll actually put a little wire under it and pull it out so they can work on it. And they usually install an implant and then wrap it up and slink it back in. But it's strong and it's iridescent too. Like if you look at the shimmering water, with oil on it, and it's
Yeah,
like got
yeah.
rainbow patterns. It looks like that. It's like mostly white, but it's really thick, like piano wire. It's really wild. It's bizarre. And if you stimulate it, you can elicit some pretty incredible things. And it's used as a treatment for seizures, for depression, just the vagus nerve. It's a huge industry. So for what I'm doing with microtubules on Twitter, on X, is essentially what I did with the vagus nerve over on Facebook. For 7 years, I have a huge Facebook group, like 30,000 people, huge engagement numbers, tons of activity on that. But I was like, well, the core thing that I'm really doing is stimulating microtubules. And I want the world to know about microtubules because there's something about consciousness there and it's really important. So, so, but yeah, what brought me to microtubules especially is the kind of I went from the brain to the vagus nerve and now I'm mostly back on the brain was that there's some papers that were published in 2022, 2023 on the brain can help reverse Alzheimer's disease. And so, you know, yes, I think if you have a vagus nerve issue, it's tough. I get that. But if you have Alzheimer's or dementia, you're really pretty fucked. Like there's no existing come back from that kind of thing. Not even the drugs do a good job. So I was like, well, fuck, man. Like I actually literally don't believe anybody else will go out there and say this. I'm like, Sterling, it's probably going to have to be you. You're going to have to fall on that sword and get out there. And I've had people be like, you're fucking crazy. But I'm like, there's tons of research on this. And I would be I would never be able to look at myself in a mirror if I knew that and just kept it private. So fuck that.
Do you feel like it picked you?
I definitely do. Yeah. Good question.
I've had that experience before, and I've met people where it's almost like the thing picks them, like the universe,
Yeah.
like somehow is working through you, has a purpose for you. It's like, I mean, I think the universe has its own purposes and it's going to pick somebody regardless. But there's,
Mm.
man, maybe I've been watching too much Rick Rubin. I don't know if you pay attention to his work, but his stuff on creativity and like
Hmm.
it's kind of woo woo, and which makes me
Yeah.
typically be a little bit standoffish. But the dude seems to be onto something, and what he's
Well, I
doing
mean, yeah, he's like
clearly
the
works.
number one producer in the world, like
Ever.
for music. Yeah, ever. So, yeah, I mean, there's definitely, you can't, I get the dismissal, but don't, you just, we're wrong about a lot of stuff. Don't dismiss everything you hear because it didn't come from, I don't know, like, we're not in the age of the authority figure who has it all figured out anymore. We're kind of, this is what I think people is breaking people's brains. They're like, but when I was younger, it was, I could just turn on the news and they tell me what's going
Hmm.
on. It was right. That's not how it is anymore. And now it's just a free for all of like, okay, we're all just trying to figure it out.
Yeah, that's
We don't know
exciting
it.
though, dude. That's exciting
Yeah.
to me because
Yeah.
the universe. The older I've gotten, like I'm almost 50, man. The older I've gotten, the more I've realized in a real visceral way that the
Mm.
universe is far stranger than we can ever understand, and there's opportunities everywhere. I think you've carved out a little niche, which is kind of like the for you got a whole bunch of forbidden fruit you're gathering up, and
Totally. It's
it's like
exciting.
yeah, yeah, and like I think that those little niches are opportunity. I think that you instead
Oh,
of
yeah.
being like, oh, who is anyone else saying this? Nobody else is saying it. I'm gonna say it.
Yeah.
Fuck it, man. Just
Right.
say it. Like lean into it and be like, this is my thing, man. Especially like I
Yeah.
said, you believe that the universe somehow is channeling this through you or put it in front of you to carry this forward. Because I the older I get and the more experience I've had, the more I believe that's actually true. There's some weird shit going on, and the universe has
Yeah.
purposes for people, and it almost pains me to say that publicly, particularly after my last episode
I
with
know. I'm
Dr.
like,
Lawrence
oh,
Krauss.
this is,
This is very
somebody's gonna
opposite.
cut that out and be like, he thinks that the universe is talking to him. No, it's I had a really, I we call it a spiritual experience, and I put together all the, like, I had a moment, flashbacks of my life, and I saw on the context, and it was also in the time, like, Elon Musk is buying Twitter, and I'm on Twitter so much, I'm seeing all these people doing, like, sending people to Mars, and I'm like, what if I have the opportunity to do lots of stuff with ultrasound? It's a wide open playing field. I could continue to stimulate the vagus nerve, and I've helped thousands of people. Like, I've done the work. If you look at me on Twitter and my Facebook, I've done that work. I put it out there. It's there. It's happening. But I'm like, I'm very much weirdly poised to do this, and I'm very confident that I'm maybe one of the only people in the world who will. I'm not institutionally controlled, which I don't think people can appreciate. I have no institutional hold on me. So I can go on the internet and say this stuff. And I'm not going to get a call from my sponsors or my handlers like I think other people will and then say ixnay on that. I don't have that. So I'm just like, what a great opportunity. And yeah, thanks to, of course, Twitter and stuff, just having a platform is I can talk about microtubules, and nothing can, short of my house getting exploded or something like that, knock on wood, I still have a connection to the internet and I have a laptop and a phone. So I'm just going to keep on speaking my thing, and I'll do it until the day I die. Hopefully, which will be maybe never if I follow Brian Johnson's
Yeah,
blueprint, but
I'm not getting baited into that conversation. I'm going to stay on track.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're getting a little bit short on time, but I wanted to ask a
Yeah.
couple questions. So like you have your experimentation you've done with this stuff. Is it number one? Is it reliably reproducible in everybody, or is it something that you get differential qualitative experiences, or maybe none, like a nothing burger for a certain type of person? And after that, I want to ask, like, if somebody like me who likes to do N of one shit would love to, experiment with this and test out what you're saying and maybe experience what that's like what can we do?
Yeah. To the first question, um, yeah. So when I started doing the vagus nerve stuff with people, I would take them through that exact process. I would basically went to my Facebook group and I said, um, we'll set you up with an ultrasound, the exact same one I did. We'll do a guided breathing session and you try it and I'll stay on the camera and you just lay down. And in those experiences, I had so many times where people like they would just stop speaking afterwards and they'd be like, "Oh my god. Oh my god. I just had a flashback to my childhood when my sister tried to drown me." Like and I've never had been able to come to terms with that. And like I just that suddenly came up. And I'm like, "That's weird." And then they're like then they message me a week later, 2 weeks later, a month later, like, "My level of stress is like gone." It's like I was that was a little sub story that was like driving most of my life. And so oftentimes that's the core thing. Whether or not you go and see a white light and you go to Central Park is not the question. Some people do have that. That's amazing. I like it when people have that, of course. It's really cool. But the way that it like flows through your life of having stimulated your vagus nerve with ultrasound, I've seen time and time again that something like clicks and the progression of their life clearly diverges towards like a more like they're more in line with their brain and their body to a degree because your vagus nerve is that connector, the axis, so to speak. So that's kind of the guaranteed. I'd say for 99% of people. The 1% who don't get anything, it's usually because they didn't place the ultrasound right, they didn't use it enough, or they're dealing with a pretty severe chronic disorder of like inflammation, and your vagus nerve controls inflammation. So if you're not getting an effect, it's most likely because your vagus nerve is so occupied with fighting off if your vagus nerve is too occupied, it's not going to give you the like amazing flowing psychedelic experience. So that is that's a conclusion.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but how is the vagus nerve what's the mechanism of inflation or sorry inflammation control there? Because I thought a lot of that was epigenetic factors and there's a bunch of other things in your body that deal with inflammation. I didn't think the nervous system had anything to do with it.
It has a lot to do with it. So quickly, I know we're like limited for time and we'll get to the next question, but your vagus nerve innervates your thymus in your throat and also your spleen. And your spleen creates all these cytokines and interleukines or interleukins. You can say them different ways.
Yeah, IL-6 and some of those other.
Yeah, exactly. IL-6, these kinds of things. TNF alpha, these kinds of things, right?
Yep.
So when you stimulate your vagus nerve, your body down regulates the production of inflammatory cytokines. And they've done this by just only targeting the vagus nerve. And they've given monkeys sepsis intentionally in the lab, two groups, one with a vagus nerve stimulator implanted and one with and another group without. The ones that didn't have their vagus nerve stimulated all died. The ones that had their vagus nerve being stimulated did not overexpress inflammation markers and did not die.
This is massive.
Vagus nerve has a lot to do with inflammation. That's a huge, huge point.
So I don't get myself in trouble, but that thing that happened to the whole world that not that long ago, that seems like that could have potentially been something that would have been helpful with that cytokine storm. No?
Yeah. Well, they did actually in a lab in a hospital down in San Diego. There's a company that I know trialing a product that they had just been working on prior to COVID. So they were just in trials. They put an ultrasound on the spleen to target the vagal nerve fibers going into your spleen under your rib cage on the left side. with ultrasound for people with literally like within 2 days of dying because they were having such an extreme cytokine storm. Cytokine storm stops that same day. They're out
Wow.
of the hospital the next day. This is published work. You can go see it online. It was a big deal. That never got mainstream enough to be of any use, I don't think, unfortunately. So that's another thing that like I'm like, oh my God, I can't manage all this stuff. Like, why God, why do I have to be the one person who has to tell everybody this shit? But so it's like there's a lot. But yeah, that was the vagus nerve. That was what they were targeting, and it could have probably saved millions. But of course, it's not a drug, so a company can't make money from it. So it doesn't exist. It's not real. Okay. So anyway,
So tell me how to
so
get
yeah,
this, man, because you've already convinced me. I want to try this 100%. I will N of one myself into the ground here. I would love to try this out.
cool. So there's two good options, and that they're really well priced, and they're ultrasounds that you can buy today, and you can buy them anywhere in the world, and they're produced by a U.S. company, and they're called the U.S. 1000 and the U.S. 2000. They output about the same ultrasound, very very similar. One's the 2000's more powerful, a little bit more powerful,
50
but they overlap.
bucks?
$54, yeah, 50 about $54
$54. Are
bucks.
you kidding me?
And that US 1000, that $50 ultrasound is the one that I used that first time. That was back in 2017. That
Oh,
was the one that I had. And I
Amazon, you're
placed that on
about to
my
get
vagus nerve and I did
$54
the
from
Wim
me.
Hof and I had these profound experiences. So I think for most people, it's like a no-brainer. Like, so, and then again, I always get the question, is it safe? Can it hurt me? Don't put ultrasound on like a pacemaker. Don't put it on metal. If you have an implant in your neck already, don't put it there. Okay? Don't put it on a metal plate in your head. Those are standard things. But as far as the safety, these things cannot hurt you at
Take
all.
your nipple rings out, you weirdos. No metal.
Yeah, take your nipple rings out or whatever you got. So just don't put it on metal in your body. If you have shrapnel from a grenade that went in your head or neck or something like that, try to avoid that. But yeah, other than that, and the only thing that would happen there is you'd feel it. Like
Get
the
hot, right? Like
ultrasound would bounce off it. It would be like you'd be like, I can feel it. So, but other than that, you're fine. Very safe. Zero instances of anything with these devices. The US 2000 is the slightly more improved version. It self heats the metal transducer. It's like 150. It's better quality in terms of the construction. It's got a larger handle. There's extra bells and whistles, but as far as the core component of being ultrasound at 1 megahertz, so it pulses 1 million times per second, it stimulates across microtubules and they start doing this undulation, which causes them to have modifications of their ability to collapse the waveform in ORCOR, and this can have an effect. And so you can use it on your temple right here on the brain, or on your vagus nerve, or both. I'm actually in a graduate program for computer science, and I had a midterm this week. I just before I went to class did ultrasound here for 5 minutes, and then I did ultrasound here for 5 minutes on medium on the US 2000, and I just whizzed through that test. I was not nervous. I was just like, this all just flows. Like I could pull all the details from all the class, all the Java concepts and everything, and it was easy. I hear that a lot from people who weren't expecting that because I don't mention that too much, but that can definitely help.
So does the
So
temporal lobe stimulation produce a qualitative effect similar to like the remote viewing or the, what psychedelic-esque experience?
yes, so it depends. So with these two devices, you're not going to have a full blown on your head, not a full blown psychedelic effect. I have used ultrasounds that are in the $40,000 range, 40,000, that are huge devices that you stimulate into your pineal gland in your head, and you can have a full blown psychedelic effect from that. And I've worked in that lab in California myself, and I've seen
Wow.
that.
Is the
So
hypothesis then that, like Rick Strassman says, that DMT is produced by the pineal gland that somehow sort of stimulates the production or something?
it seems like the description was very like DMT style. But yeah, I mean it's also stimulating the core microtubules. It's probably even a weirder, better effect. It's more focal. If you do it in your lungs, it's everywhere. This is just your brain's only tripping. So, but it could be the seed of your soul, or I don't know, whatever. But yes, so yeah, I mean, yeah, it's an investment. They're coming out with devices that do that. They have meditation retreats you do now, where you can go down to Arizona and have your brain stimulated in that way,
Tell me
and
it's
then sit
Sedona.
and
Tell
meditate.
me it's Sedona.
No, it's not Sedona actually. No, it's not Sedona. It's in Tucson, Arizona, so closer to the border.
Got it.
Um, but yeah, so with these normal ultrasounds, if you want to have that psychedelic effect, you do want to combine it with the Wim Hof. But if you do the brain stimulation on like medium setting on either of the devices, you get the microdose kind of feeling. You're like, whoa, like I definitely feel like I just took like a tiny little bit of acid or something like that. It's got that kind of effect, but it's nice. And it's not like, doesn't make you drunk, doesn't make you fall over, slow your words. You feel like really, again, if it's focusing on the microtubules, and the microtubules are where your consciousness comes from, I think you're going to want to be more conscious than less conscious, right? If you're showing up to life and you're doing shape rotations on math all the time, your microtubules are able to do that better. I think there's a tangible follow through effect from that. So yeah, those are the two options. I've written about this in an article recently on my. Actually, if you look at the articles on my X account on Sterling Cooley, whatever, the articles have tons of things like, so you want to try ultrasound? Here are the links. Here's where you place it. Here's pictures, XYZ. Everything's listed out. I'm just like, take it, use it. If you have a great effect, that's awesome. Like, yay, go live a good life. I don't,
Awesome.
if you want to message me and say that's cool, you can. If you don't, I don't really care. My DMs are pretty full already. So
awesome.
yeah.
Hey, dude, like,
Yeah.
I know we're a little bit over, but man, this was like one of the best conversations I've had on the podcast to date. I love learning new things that are highly impactful, right? Like not only theoretically, this is a whole new framework for me to conceptualize, but also practically, because I'm a psychedelic practitioner. I love microdosing. I think I'm in computer science, man. We all do this shit.
Yeah.
So having something like ultrasound for $54 that I could try out is pretty attractive. I want to give it a shot. Let's I'm not going to do the Brian Johnson shit, but I will biohack myself in some psychedelic way with my vagus nerve all day long. So I'm there, brother.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast, and yeah.
Tell everyone where to find you, man, for the folks that don't know you.
Yeah, so my Twitter is a good place to find me actively posting every day. I also have a website. It's called ultraschool.com, and it's spelt with a K. This is the hat. School, SKOOL. So if you go to school.com/ultra, we have a whole place there. We also have a link for a vagus nerve specific group for people who are having like those inflammatory problems, right? So people are like, I know I'm not going to have the psychedelic experience, but I need the work on my immune system. We have a group for that too. And they're both managed. They're phenomenal. They're packed with information. So yeah.
Awesome. Everybody go check it out. Dude, thank you so much for stopping by. And I promise you, I'm going to invite you back many times. This is, we did not even scratch the surface of topics I wanted to talk about.
There's so much more I can say on this stuff.
Oh,
especially the consciousness. We should definitely do, now that we've set the kind of the ground level for it, there's a like deeper stuff in there too.
Let's do it, dude. All right, cool. Yeah. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by. I'll let you go for tonight, but man, really was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brent. Appreciate it.
Bye.